Researchers who take Bigfoot seriously don't take every alleged Bigfoot video seriously. In fact, they're often the first to call foul on the fakers. So when they tell us they've seen video they think is legit, we take a look too.
Even dedicated Bigfoot researchers maintain healthy skepticism about alleged sightings. They're often the first to debunk questionable footage rather than blindly accepting every claim. But occasionally, something emerges that challenges even the most critical minds. A peaceful retreat turns horrifying. What began as a solitary retreat transformed into an encounter that would forever alter one man's perception of reality. Deep within Washington state's dense forest land, an individual seeking solitude experienced something that defies conventional explanation. This wasn't just another blurry, distant sighting. This anonymous witness captured what many experts consider the most compelling and terrifying photographic evidence of Bigfoot ever documented. However, the aftermath of obtaining these images would leave anyone deeply unsettled. Let's follow this man's journey into the wilderness and uncover what truly lurks beyond the tree line. Our witness, whose identity remains protected, had sought refuge in a secluded cabin, hoping to escape the pressures of everyday life. The second evening of his stay would prove life-changing. As darkness fell and the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, an unexplainable sense of discomfort began to creep over him. Initially, he dismissed the sensation as merely the natural sounds of an aging wooden structure settling for the night. Then, something captured his attention. A distinct handprint appeared on the frost-covered window, a handprint from the exterior of the cabin. Beyond the protective glow of his temporary sanctuary, a face materialized from the darkness. This was no ordinary visage. Framed by untamed matted hair, the face was enormous, with deeply recessed eyes that seemed to emit a faint, otherworldly illumination. Frozen in shock, the man's instincts kicked in. He reached for his phone. With violently trembling hands, he began documenting the encounter. The initial photographs were predictably unfocused, mere smudges of light against shadow. Yet he persisted, capturing image after image with each camera flash. With every burst of light, the creature's features became increasingly defined and unmistakable. Perhaps most disturbing was the being's reaction. It appeared almost curious, even amused by the human's attempts to record its presence. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the surrounding darkness, leaving the witness alone with his racing heartbeat and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. The remainder of the night passed in a fog of sleeplessness. Every sound from outside, every subtle creak of the cabin's structure, heightened his anxiety about the creature's possible return. The photographic evidence. When morning finally arrived, the man reviewed his photographic evidence. While many images lacked clarity, several captured the unmistakable outline of something massive, powerful, and utterly beyond conventional explanation. Deciding whether to share these images publicly presented a significant dilemma. Bigfoot encounters routinely face ridicule and skepticism. Nevertheless, the witness felt compelled to document his experience. Using an anonymous identity, he uploaded the photographs to online communities dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The response was immediate and polarizing. Believers championed his images as definitive proof of Bigfoot's existence, while skeptics carefully analyzed every pixel, searching for evidence of manipulation or deception. The creature's distinctive posture, the unusual glow of its eyes, and its immense proportions aligned with countless previous eyewitness accounts. Many observers noted striking similarities to the Sasquatch legends preserved by indigenous communities of the Pacific Northwest, who described the being as a forest guardian, possessing both immense power and profound mystery. Critics, however, remained unconvinced. They questioned the absence of video footage and the lack of corroborating witnesses. To these skeptics, the photographs represented just another elaborate hoax in a long history of Bigfoot fabrications. But for those who accepted the authenticity of the man's account, these images added to the growing body of evidence suggesting something extraordinary inhabits the depths of North America's forests. A history of encounters. This remarkable sighting doesn't exist in isolation. Reports of Bigfoot-like creatures have persisted for generations, with Washington state emerging as a particular hotspot for such encounters. From unexplained vocalizations to enormous footprints, residents throughout the region have documented experiences that challenge rational explanation. Among these witnesses is a woman identified only as Barb, whose fascination with Sasquatch began during childhood and evolved into a lifetime of extraordinary encounters. Barb's introduction to the phenomenon occurred in the 1970s during a family camping excursion near Mount St. Helens. Park rangers shared stories of mysterious ape-like beings that ignited her lifelong interest in the subject. Decades later, while walking near her private cabin, Barb discovered an enormous footprint deeply impressed into the soil. This discovery rekindled her belief in the creature's existence and marked the beginning of her personal investigation. Over subsequent years, Barb encountered numerous inexplicable phenomena: trees with snapped tops, arranged branches that suggested intelligent design, and perhaps most remarkably, luminous orbs moving purposefully through the forest. These occurrences felt deliberate, as though orchestrated by an intelligent entity. Then came a watershed moment. Barb captured what she described as a cloaking Sasquatch with her camera. The figure seemed to shift between visibility and invisibility, defying logical explanation and leaving her profoundly shaken. Barb's experiences mirror countless others who claim Bigfoot encounters. Another witness, identified as Joseph, described a terrifying incident in Olympic National Park. While hiking with his girlfriend and their dog, they observed an enormous orange-haired creature carrying what appeared to be a bloodied animal carcass. The encounter left their once fearless dog permanently traumatized. These diverse accounts share remarkable commonalities: the creature's enormous size, its elusive nature, and the profound psychological impact it leaves on witnesses. For every believer, however, skeptics stand ready to dismiss these narratives as folklore or elaborate deceptions. As the debate continues, one certainty remains: the legend of Bigfoot endures. Whether a product of imagination or a flesh-and-blood species, it captures humanity's fascination with the unknown. For those who have locked eyes with this being, the question isn't whether Bigfoot exists, but what its existence means for our understanding of the natural world. Deeper into the mystery. As the years passed, Barb's casual interest evolved into methodical investigation. On a crisp morning in April 1992, while traversing an overgrown logging trail that snaked through the forest bordering her property, she came upon something experienced woodsmen had whispered about for decades: a distinctive pattern of tree damage that defied conventional explanation. Nearly 24 towering pines, each standing over 100 feet tall, displayed clean breaks at their uppermost points, approximately 15 to 20 feet from their tops. The fractures weren't jagged or splintered, as would be expected from storm damage. Instead, they appeared surgically precise, as though something possessing immense strength had deliberately snapped each trunk at the exact same height. Local wildlife officials later confirmed that no known natural phenomenon could explain the consistent pattern across such a wide area. The breaks would have required force exceeding 1,200 pounds of pressure per square inch, far beyond human capability without heavy machinery, which showed no tracks in the undisturbed forest floor. The tree discovery pushed Barb deeper into the dense woodland, where a clearing of damp soil revealed what she immediately recognized as a footprint, but on a scale that made her pulse quicken. Measuring 17 inches from heel to toe and nearly 8 inches across at its widest point, the impression sank almost 4 inches into the hardened clay soil. Wildlife biologists later calculated that to create such a deep impression would require a creature weighing at least 800 pounds, distributing its weight primarily on 2 legs. Most remarkable were the clearly defined dermal ridges, the equivalent of human fingerprints, visible across the ball and heel of the massive foot, suggesting this wasn't just a large print, but one with anatomical characteristics no known Northwest animal possesses. What began as Barb's casual curiosity transformed into an all-consuming obsession. She installed 4 motion-activated trail cameras around her property, purchased specialized recording equipment to capture nighttime forest sounds, and meticulously documented every unusual occurrence in a series of leather-bound journals that eventually filled an entire bookshelf. Each discovery, twisted branches formed into unusual arch patterns, tufts of unidentifiable reddish-brown hair caught on tree bark, strange knocking sounds that seemed to communicate across valleys, brought her incrementally closer to confirming what she now firmly believed. An intelligent, highly elusive species shared these forests. By 1998, Barb's reputation had spread throughout the community of serious researchers. Her methodical approach and detailed records stood in stark contrast to the often sensationalized accounts that plagued Bigfoot research. Then came the incident that would shake even her scientific approach. During a thunderstorm in November 2003, while sitting beside her fireplace reviewing field notes, Barb heard a tremendous thud on her cabin's metal roof. The impact was so forceful it dislodged dust from the ceiling beams. Initially dismissing it as storm debris, perhaps a broken branch, her blood ran cold when she heard what sounded unmistakably like heavy footsteps traversing the roof's length before something massive descended with a thud that shook her cabin's foundation. The watershed moment in Barb's decades-long search came unexpectedly in September 2012. While quietly observing a herd of 23 elk grazing in a meadow adjacent to her property, a regular habit that had yielded nothing unusual for years, she noticed something that made her instinctively reach for her digital camera. At the meadow's far edge, partially obscured by shadow and fir branches, a massive bipedal figure moved with deliberate stealth, pacing the herd's perimeter while remaining just beyond the elk's awareness. Even through her 200mm telephoto lens, the figure seemed to resist documentation, inexplicably blurring whenever directly focused upon, as though somehow manipulating light around its enormous frame. The most unnerving aspect was its method of movement. Not the awkward lumbering one might expect from a large animal on two legs, but fluid, calculated stalking that displayed unmistakable intelligence. The figure maintained perfect positioning downwind from the herd, demonstrating advanced hunting knowledge. When Barb adjusted her camera settings to capture more light, the being seemed to sense the electronic change. It turned directly toward her position over 300 yards away, stared for 3 seconds with eyes that reflected an unusual reddish glow, unlike typical mammalian eyeshine, and then simply disappeared. Not by running or ducking behind trees, but by seemingly dissolving into the forest backdrop, despite standing in what moments before had been open terrain. Upon reviewing her footage frame by frame, Barb discovered something that challenged conventional zoological understanding. In 7 sequential frames, the figure remained mostly transparent, visible primarily as a heat distortion effect similar to mirages on hot roadways, before briefly solidifying in 3 crisp frames that revealed a towering muscular silhouette covered in dark auburn hair, with proportions matching no known North American wildlife. Then it returned to its nearly invisible state before vanishing completely. Most compelling was the couple's description of the creature's unusual movement pattern and eye reflection, specific details they couldn't possibly have known from Barb's then unpublished footage, yet which matched it precisely. Their independent account, coming from respected outdoor professionals with extensive wildlife knowledge, provided crucial corroboration that these sightings weren't isolated incidents, but encounters with the same type of being across a geographic range spanning hundreds of miles of Pacific Northwest wilderness. The Olympic Peninsula has long been a focal point for Bigfoot sightings. Its dense vegetation and challenging terrain provide ideal habitat for creatures adept at avoiding human detection. Researchers exploring the area have reported discovering large nest-like structures constructed from branches, unexplained vocalizations echoing through the forest, and glimpses of luminous eyes in the darkness. Barb's dedication to uncovering the truth has established her as a prominent figure within Bigfoot research circles. Her experiences and evidence have renewed interest in the phenomenon. While acknowledging the skepticism surrounding such claims, she remains unwavering in her conviction. The forests, she argues, harbor secrets that defy conventional explanation.
Portlock was cursed and Bigfoot's place and nobody goes there.
Overnight, everybody left.
The cursed town of Portlock. Our journey now takes us to an even more disturbing location, one where survival itself becomes questionable and the forest harbors entities beyond comprehension. Portlock, Alaska isn't merely another abandoned settlement. This remote location carries a reputation for terror, disappearances, and a malevolent presence unlike any other. Its history spans centuries and has generated more questions than answers. To understand why this community was deserted not once but 4 separate times requires exploring its chilling past, a history filled with disturbing details and unsolved mysteries that continue to confound anyone who attempted to make Portlock their home. The narrative begins in the late 18th century when British explorer Nathaniel Portlock arrived at the location that would eventually bear his name. He discovered a pristine landscape abundant with resources. Fish filled the bay, game populated the surrounding woods, and the site appeared ideal for settlement. However, Portlock and his expedition members were puzzled by the remains of an indigenous village they discovered. The structures remained intact, yet the location was completely deserted. It appeared as though the inhabitants had simply vanished, abandoning a perfectly viable settlement in an apparently ideal location. Portlock's crew didn't dwell on this mystery. They established their own settlement to capitalize on the plentiful resources. Their plans quickly unraveled as expedition members began experiencing unusual symptoms. Beyond physical ailments, they reported overwhelming fear that seemed to emanate from the land itself. The crew's discomfort intensified until they eventually persuaded Portlock to abandon the site, never discovering what had driven away the original inhabitants. What Portlock couldn't have known was that 6 years earlier, Spanish explorers had experienced something remarkably similar at the same location. Like Portlock's expedition, they discovered the abandoned indigenous settlement and were baffled by its emptiness. Recognizing the area's potential, the Spanish explorers attempted to establish a settlement. Their occupation proved brief. They suffered from the same mysterious ailments and overwhelming dread. Strange sounds came from the forest at night, seemingly drawing closer to their encampment with each passing hour. Terrified and ill, the Spanish abandoned the site, just as Portlock's expedition would years later. For nearly a century, Portlock remained uninhabited. Then, in the 1860s, a group of Sugpiaq natives decided to attempt settlement, drawn by the promise of abundant fishing and hunting. They established a new community and initially prospered with plentiful food sources. Their prosperity proved short-lived. Within weeks, they reported attacks by what they described as cannibalistic giants, enormous, savage entities that were distinctly non-human. The attacks became relentless, with these giants raiding the village night after night. The settlers defended themselves, but the giants possessed overwhelming strength and determination. A pattern emerged. When game was plentiful in the surrounding forest, the attacks ceased. When natural food sources grew scarce, the giants returned, seeking human prey. Faced with this horrifying reality, the settlers had no choice but to abandon their homes, leaving behind disturbing accounts of man-eating giants that would haunt regional folklore for generations. By 1905, Portlock had once again become a ghost town. It wasn't until 1921 that another group attempted settlement, the Alutiiq people, who introduced modern industry to the area. They constructed a salmon cannery, post office, school, and infrastructure necessary to transform Portlock into a thriving 20th century community. The Alutiiq were well aware of the region's dark history. They had heard stories of the giants, which they called non-tinok, a term some translated as half-man, half-beast, while others simply described them as giant hairy beings. Determined not to repeat the mistakes of previous settlers, the Alutiiq implemented strict safety protocols. They established curfews, positioned armed guards throughout the settlement, and strictly prohibited entering the forest or venturing out during foggy conditions. These precautions seemed effective initially. The town flourished, and life in Portlock appeared peaceful. But this uneasy coexistence wouldn't endure. By the late 1920s, safety regulations became less stringent. Community members grew overconfident, entering the forest and ignoring curfew restrictions. That's when the attacks resumed. In 1931, a logger named Andrew Kamluck ventured deeper into the forest than anyone had dared. He never returned. When search parties located him, they discovered a scene defying explanation. Kamluck's body lay with his skull crushed, and his sled, too heavy for any human to lift, had been thrown a considerable distance from where he fell. His dogs had been torn apart. This gruesome discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Whatever killed Kamluck clearly wasn't human, though precisely what it was remained uncertain. Shortly afterward, Another resident, Thomas Larson, reported observing a massive hair-covered creature standing upright on the shoreline. He described it as far too large to be human, yet eerily humanoid in its movements. Larson claimed he aimed his rifle at the being, but couldn't bring himself to fire. His account intensified the growing fear gripping Portlock. The settlers realized the legends weren't merely folklore. Something very real stalked their community, and it was growing increasingly aggressive. As years passed, disappearances increased. Hunters and prospectors vanished without trace, while bodies began appearing in horrifying condition. Some recovered from the bay showing evidence of mauling and claw marks. Others discovered along trails dismembered in ways defying rational explanation. The community reinstated strict safety protocols and posted additional guards, but nothing halted the attacks. By 1950, conditions had become unbearable. In a sudden, nearly overnight exodus, the entire population abandoned Portlock. Only a single postal worker remained briefly before departing, driven away by sounds of something heavy and bipedal prowling the deserted streets. The abandoned trails of Portlock. For decades afterward, Portlock remained abandoned, but the disturbing accounts continued. Hunters venturing into the area reported being stalked by unseen presences. Some described hearing footsteps following them, while others reported guttural growls seemingly emanating from nowhere. One hunting party discovered enormous humanoid footprints measuring over 18 inches in length. These tracks led to flattened vegetation where a moose appeared to have been taken down. The moose's tracks ended abruptly while the humanoid footprints continued into the mountains, leaving little doubt about what had claimed the kill. Even skeptics struggle to explain Portlock's history. Many suggest bears as potential culprits, but the evidence doesn't align with bear behavior. Bears don't typically destroy heavy equipment or dismember humans in the manner described in these accounts. While bears can briefly stand upright, they don't leave footprints resembling those of giant humanoids. Others propose that deaths and disappearances resulted from accidents, but this theory falters when considering the sheer number of incidents and the condition of recovered remains. Adding to the mystery are accounts preserved by the Alutiiq people. Some elders acknowledge that the Nantinak were genuine beings that their ancestors took great care to avoid. They describe these entities as intelligent, territorial, and extremely dangerous. Even today, those passing through the area proceed cautiously, mindful of ancestral warnings. Despite these disturbing accounts, some argue that the Nantinak legend is merely folklore, stories invented to prevent children from wandering into dangerous forest areas or to explain the inherent dangers of such remote wilderness. Yet even dismissing tales of cannibalistic giants and hair-covered humanoids, something undeniably drove multiple groups to abandon this seemingly perfect location. One scientific theory suggests infrasound, low-frequency sound waves produced by certain animals, could be responsible. Infrasound can induce nausea, disorientation, and intense dread, all symptoms reported by Portlock's early settlers. Predators like tigers use infrasound to disorient prey, and possibly whatever inhabited Portlock's forests possessed similar capabilities. While this might explain the strange sensations and fear experienced by residents, it doesn't account for the physical attacks or dismembered bodies. Others point to the region's unique geography. Dense forest and rugged terrain could easily conceal predators, whether natural or supernatural. Portlock's isolation meant incidents were difficult to investigate properly, allowing room for speculation and exaggeration. Even with these rational explanations, the sheer number of disappearances and the gruesome condition of recovered bodies make it difficult to dismiss the accounts entirely. Could something truly supernatural be responsible for Portlock's abandoned history? The forest holds its secrets closely, and some questions may never find satisfactory answers. But one thing remains certain. Something unusual haunts the shadows of Portlock, Alaska, something that has consistently driven humans away for centuries. Whatever lurks in America's remote wilderness, these accounts remind us that perhaps we don't truly understand all that exists in the world's remaining unexplored regions. Some mysteries may be better left unsolved, some forests better left unexplored.